Junji Ito Maniac, Japanese Tales of the Macabre. Jesus, that's a mouthful. No, this is not the obnoxiously long title of an early 2000s emo song, but rather an anthology series adapting 20 different stories from beloved Japanese horror artist Junji Ito. This is not the first time his work has been adapted into an animated series. In fact, Studio Dean, the animation studio behind Maniac, previously worked on 2017's Junji Ito Collection, which was released to reviews. Netflix's Maniac is also a bit of a mixed bag. There's some standout episodes, and then there's Suichi. Join me as I rank every single story from worst to best. What are my credentials, you might be asking? It doesn't matter. It's the internet. We blindly listen to content creators and take absolutely everything they say at face value despite a complete lack of empirical evidence. Alright, let's get started. Also, spoiler alert. There are spoilers. Frankly, a lot of them. This was an absolutely insane choice to open the series with. Junji Ito's Addams Family on Bath Salts is a tonally confusing adaptation of the less interesting second part of a two-part story. It's weird, underwhelming, and a pretty terrible starting point to introduce Junji Ito to an unfamiliar audience. I watched the English dub, and the daughter's voice actor incited more rage in me in 20 minutes than Joffrey did over 4 seasons of Game of Thrones.
What the fuck?
It's not a bad story, it just doesn't adapt particularly well into an episode of television. That's gonna be a bit of a running theme. I can already hear the sound of the mob gathering outside with their pitchforks and torches. What are you gonna do, cancel me on Twitter? I only have like 3 followers. I know people like this story about a nerd processing his childhood trauma with books, but I just can't find the appeal here. It feels like a story they'd make you dissect in a high school English class. Honestly, it's probably not as bad as the Suichi episodes, but I needed the spicy take to get engagement in the comments. I have an honest question. Does anyone like Suichi? I mean, I don't think Suichi himself is supposed to be likable. He's not some mischievous scamp who rides around on a skateboard and plays pranks on his neighbors. This is a weird story where a family hires the world's most sus contractor to soundproof their son's room since he's continually tortured by his brother Suichi, and the contractor ends up making a tiny joke room. Suichi continues to torture his brother by living in the walls of the funny tiny room before abruptly passing out, and then I guess it's over. This one gets to be 1 rank higher on the list because we get to watch Suichi get absolutely fucking obliterated by this cat. Alternate dimension version of the protagonist is a serial killer who is burying his victims from his own dimension in the protagonist's yard. It sounds like a great premise, but it's underwhelming and overall feels incomplete. While you don't necessarily need to know the other chapters of the story this one is adapted from, it really helps to tie the whole thing together. It just kind of feels like you're missing something while watching this episode. I don't know, man, it's headless mannequins trying to steal heads. It's nothing groundbreaking. I love Junji Ito, but this is the kind of story you pump out when you forget your creative writing assignment is due at midnight. I'm gonna be honest, I wrote down the titles of each story on a list, and when I was writing my reviews, every single time I got to this one, I was like, what the fuck is the unendurable labyrinth? I had to look it up, no lie, probably 4 separate times. It is a completely forgettable story about 2 girls joining an enigmatic Buddhist-ish cult, where eventually it's revealed that the highest honor is to achieve eternal meditation as a living mummy. I am completely apathetic towards this story. I have nothing good or bad to say about it. Classic Junji Ito cosmic horror. This one is pretty faithful to the story it's adapted from, but unfortunately I feel that it works a lot better in its original medium. Junji Ito loves ambiguity, and his short stories build up enough tension that the abrupt ending works, leaving you to reflect on what just happened and fill in the gaps for what comes next. In the anime, it just kind of feels like they forgot to finish the episode. Adapting any single part of Tomie was always going to be challenging because you lose the context of who Tomie is and why school kids are literally willing to commit murder for her. As someone who has read the full story, I can look at it with that lens, but this would probably be a pretty underwhelming story for anyone missing that context. Also, why didn't they adapt Hair? It would have worked way better as a standalone story. As As long as you don't think much about the logistics and just general implications of having a self-contained version of yourself from every year nesting as chronological layers of skin like the world's most upsetting Russian nesting doll, there's a pretty interesting story here. It's toned down from the original manga, but the sound design and premise of toxic parenting is especially unnerving. The manga's original ending is far superior, but the sound design and premise carry this comfortably to the halfway point of this list. A tunnel with a strange allure traps the souls of people who die there. That's all it needs to be. If you're a fan of gross visuals or just hate landlords, you'll find something to enjoy here. I like the black and gray color palette they use for this episode. It makes everything feel gross and claustrophobic, and I kinda wish they used this for the other episodes. There's a bunch of stuff cut from the original story, like how the science teacher used to do experiments with fungus. I assume it was to bring the runtime down, but it's literally the entire context for the mold. It would be like if Jurassic Park just left out the part where they explain they were cloning dinosaurs. A story about a man whose dream version tries to climb out of his body every time he falls asleep. Junji Ito dream stories are great. This one is noticeably short. I think it clocks in at just over 7 minutes. They really should have cut a couple minutes from the Suichi segment before it because that episode sucked, and this one feels like a speed run of the story. Great traditional jealousy-driven revenge story with an absolutely gruesome ending. On paper, a story about sentient hair probably sounds pretty ridiculous, but Junji Ito is a master of anthropomorphizing just about anything, and it really works in the context of this story. Also, the sound of grinding teeth is absolutely stomach-turning, and I hate it. This story is unnerving. I hate putting it at number 6 because the depictions of abuse are pretty tough to digest, especially when the bully turns her malice towards her child. No supernatural or cosmic horror elements here, just an evil human doing evil things. Definitely need a palate cleanser after this one. A girl who murdered multiple people in the alley next to her house creates a group of vengeful spirits that appear every night trying to get revenge. I don't know what I liked so much about this story. There's just so much nihilism in Junji Ito's work that a story ending with karmic justice just feels especially satisfying. I don't know whether putting Library Vision at number 19 or Ice Cream Truck at number 4 is the more controversial choice, but I loved how truly fucking bizarre this story was. From the horrific visual of a gang of children eating from one giant sopping pile of ice cream like some sick dessert swingers party, to the father karate chopping his goopy child in half. Every minute of the short revels in absurdity. Junji Ito does weird just as good as he does horror, and he is completely off the rails here. It's an emotional horror story with some creepy visuals and a great payoff. A girl suffering from crippling indecisiveness and her hired aide who helps her to make decisions form a strong bond, until the aide is eventually murdered, but continues to whisper to her from beyond the grave. The girl then enacts violent revenge on the murderer. Great stuff all around. Junji Ito's brain just works differently than ours. A story about a town where, when people die, their decaying body transforms into a tombstone in the exact spot that they passed. Moving the body before they've tombstonified causes the dead to not be at peace. 2 students visiting the town accidentally hit a pedestrian and throw her body in their trunk. As you can imagine, shit hits the proverbial fan. A great story about guilt and punishment wrapped in a very bizarre and creative premise. That's right, it's the safe pick. Could it be anything else? It's classic Junji Ito. Giant balloon heads show up, each with the face of a person in the city. They have nooses hanging from the bottom, and their only objective is to hang their matching person. We don't need to know why. We just need to be unsettled. And despite some very clunky 3D animation, it is an unsettling story. It's definitely the strongest adaptation of the bunch and a glimpse into what could have been a great series if there was just a bit more consistency. And that's every story ranked. My final thoughts: a lot of the episodes are a bit underwhelming, which really highlights the difficulty in adapting Junji Ito stories into television. A lot of these stories are lifted directly from the manga panels, which a lot of the time doesn't translate well in terms of pacing and reveals. Adaptation requires tweaking the source material to fit the new medium. It's why The Last of Us doesn't have Joel mowing down hundreds of zombies with a shotgun. Layers of Fear could have easily been a top 5 episode, but the timing of the reveals is just so bizarre. There's definitely some noticeably lazy animation. I get that animation is expensive and takes a lot of effort, but doing zoom-ins on static frames just feels frustratingly cheap. I think there's enough here that warrants a watch, but Junji Ito deserves better. We all deserve better. Most of you probably clicked off the video after I put Library Vision at number 19, but if you're still here, you should consider liking and subscribing. Maybe if you do, I'll bring you some more spooky content. See you next time.